Genshin Impact is a wondrous game with an ever-growing world and stylish art design. It's able to capture the imagination of players. Whether you enjoy the world, story or gameplay, one aspect that keeps players coming back for more are the amazing characters. So I'm Darcblade with a character guide to Kamisato, Ayato in Genshin Impact. In this character guide, we will briefly cover the basic lore of the character, their moves, abilities, weapon options, stat priorities and artifact builds. Remember though that these guides are aimed at free-to-play and low-spender players, so they will feature the characters as if they were mainly Constellation level 0 with 4-star weaponry, but there may be one or two exceptions to this. Kamisato Ayato is a 5-star Hydro sword-wielding character, but in order to get him, you have to wish for him on limited time banners with intertwined fates. Ayato is currently the accomplished head of the Yashiro Commission's Kamisato clan, as well as the brother to Kamisato Ayaka. A quiet man on the surface, he is polite, reserved and humble, but is nonetheless talented and learned in many things. From navigating the political landscapes of Inazuma to his own personal martial arts, Ayato is a man of many skills. Behind the scenes, he is also incredibly kind, not only to friends and family, but people who work for him too. This inspires loyalty in many people who follow him. But that being all said, he is not a pushover. He is capable of mischievous tactics, should the situation call for it. Through a combination of his charisma, as well as natural cunning, he is able to overcome foes, and should that fail, he can always fall back on his martial prowess. Now every character in Genshin Impact has access to various talents. These are divided into combat talents and passive talents. Combat talents are your moves and abilities that you use in a fight, whilst passive talents are mechanics that work in the background of a character. When it comes to Kamisato Ayato, his first combat talent is normal attack Kamisato Art, Morobashi. When pressing the attack button, Ayato will perform up to 5 rapid strikes with his sword in a 5-hit combo. Alternatively, you can hold down the attack button to perform a charged attack, which will consume a small amount of stamina but cause Ayato to rush forward, performing an EI slash, knocking weaker foes away. And then finally, he also has access to a plunging attack, which is done by pressing the attack button whilst mid-air, which will cause Ayato to plummet towards the ground, damaging opponents in an AoE around the impact zone. The next combat talent is the Kamisato Art Kyuka. This is his elemental skill, and it has multiple aspects to it. When pressed, Ayato will shift positions and enter the Takimagori Kanka state. Doing this will cause Ayato to leave a watery illusion in his original location, whilst he appears behind it. This illusion will explode if nearby foes are near it, or after its duration ends, dealing AoE hydro damage to opponents nearby. Also, on top of the watery illusion, when in the Takimagori Kanka state, Ayato will be able to use Shunsukin attacks. These are lightning fast normal attacks performed with the normal attack button that causes AoE hydro damage. This hydro damage cannot be overwritten by other means. On top of that, when a Shunsukin attack hits an opponent, it will grant Ayato the Namisen effect, which is indicated by a little icon to the right of Ayato and stacks up to 4 times. With each stack, the damage dealt by the Shunsuken attack is increased based off of Ayato's maximum HP, but this effect will be dispelled after the elemental skill ends or if Ayato leaves the field. Additionally, during the elemental skill, Ayato will receive resistance to interruption, but he will not be able to perform charged or plunging attacks. The next combat talent is the Kamisato Art Tsuyu, which is Ayato's elemental burst. When used, Ayato will create a large AoE of falling hydro damage around his location, dealing a steady amount of hydro damage as the rain falls on opponents. On top of that, characters within this AoE will also have their normal attack damage increased, meaning that this elemental burst is not only a great way to deal hydro damage, as well as apply the hydro effect to opponents, but it can also increase everyone's damage. The downside is that this elemental burst unfortunately has a high energy cost of 80. Anyway, let's move on to the passive talents. First of all is the Kamisato Art Miniwo Matu Ishi Kiyotaki. This is a talent that affects your elemental skill. After you use it, Ayato will gain 2 Namisen stacks straight away, and then when the watery illusion explodes, Ayato will gain more Namisen stacks equivalent to the maximum number of stacks possible, increasing how quickly you can deal maximum damage with your elemental skill. The next passive talent is Kamisato Art Michiyuku Hayatsu, which affects Ayato's elemental burst. Basically, when Ayato is not on the field and his energy is less than 40, he will regenerate 2 energy for himself every second, alleviating the high energy cost that his elemental burst has. And then finally, his last passive talent is Kamisato Art Daily Cooking. When Ayato cooks a dish perfectly, he has an 18% chance to receive additional suspicious dish of that same type. So those are all the talents available to Ayato. let's quickly move on to talk about the constellations. Now remember that these guides are aimed at characters who are constellation level 0. However, if you were lucky enough to get extra constellations for Ayato, there are a few that stand out. First of all is constellation level 2, World Source. The Namisen maximum stack count is increased to 5, and when Kamisato Ayato has at least 3 Namisen stacks, his max HP is increased by 50, increasing the damage of your elemental skill overall. You also have constellation level 4, Endless Flow. After using your elemental burst, all nearby party members will have their normal attack speed increased by 15% for 15 seconds. And then finally you have Boundless Origin, constellation level 6. After using your elemental skill, Ayato's next Shinsuken attack will create 2 extra Shinsuken strikes when they hit an opponent, each one dealing 450% of Ayato's attack as damage. These attacks are not affected by the Namisen stacks as well. But let's move on to the next section of the video where we talk about the various builds that I would like to use for Kamisato Ayato. Now the way Ayato's kit is structured is, it seems that he leans more towards a main DPS more than anything. The fact that he can perform lightning fast normal attacks and apply Hydro relatively easy makes him perfect for this role. So the first build I like to use is the main DPS build. So first of all, when it comes to weaponry, of course 5-star weaponry is going to be optimal, but if you are not able to get 5-star weapons, when it comes to your 4-star options, I'd first recommend the Black Sword, which gives us a crit rate increase and gives us the Justice bonus, which increases our normal and charged attack damage by 20% at refinement level 1, which can be even higher at higher refinements, and additionally it regenerates 60% of our attack as HP whenever our normal or charged attacks crit a monster once every 5 seconds. But we're mainly taking this for the crit rate as well as the increase to our normal attacks, which benefit Ayato's playstyle. Failing that, other DPS swords you may want to consider are the Black Cliff Longsword if you have it, which gives us crit damage increase, and after defeating an opponent it also increases our attack. The Amenoma Kageuchi is also a good sword, which is the craftable Inazuma sword, which gives us an attack percentage increase, and gives us the Irokawa Succession bonus, which after using an elemental skill, we gain 1 Succession Seed, which can stack up to a maximum of 3 times, and then when using an elemental burst, these seeds will be consumed, increasing our energy regeneration. And then finally I'd probably recommend the Flute, which again gives us an attack increase, and on top of that our normal or charged attacks grant us a harmonic bonus, which afterwards when these stack up to 5 times will trigger an AoE explosion dealing 100% attack damage to opponents. So there are a few options there for Kamisato Ayato. But when it comes to the artifacts for this main DPS build, you kind of have 2 options to go for. You can either go for 4 pieces of the Heart of the Depth set or 4 pieces of the Echoes of an Offering. With the Heart of the Depth set, for wearing 2 pieces, your Hydro damage will be increased by 15%, and for wearing 4 pieces of the Artifact set, after using an elemental skill, your normal attacks and charge attack damage will be increased by 30%, greatly benefiting Ayato's playstyle. The other option is the Echoes of Offering, which for wearing 2 pieces of this artifact set will grant us an attack increase of 18%, and for wearing 4 pieces, when a normal attack hits an opponent, there is a 36% chance that you'll trigger a Valley Right, which will increase your normal attack damage by 70% of your attack. This effect will be dispelled 0.05 seconds after a normal attack deals damage, and if the normal attack fails to trigger that Valley Right buff, the odds of triggering it the next time you normal attack is increased by 20%, which basically means that your normal attacks will deal a large amount of damage. And as Ayato can perform fast normal attacks with his elemental skill active, you should be benefiting from this quite often. But as for the stats, when it comes to your sands, you want to focus on either HP or attack percentage. When it comes to your goblet, I'd recommend going for hydro damage, or you can go for attack percentage, and then for your circlet you want to go for either crit rate or crit damage. As for the substats, I'd recommend crit damage and crit rate first, followed by attack percentage, then HP percentage, and then the rest. And then when it comes to your talents, I'd first recommend going for your elemental skill, followed by your normal attacks, and then your elemental burst. As our elemental skill and normal attacks is going to be the main source of DPS with this build, I believe this is the talent priority you want to focus on. This way, your normal attacks, which Ayato specializes in, will be dealing a lot of damage. But that brings us on to the next build, which I referred to as the support build. This is all about performing Ayato's elemental burst as quickly as possible, allowing it to deal a decent amount of damage whilst at the same time buffing our teammates who are within the radius of our elemental burst, increasing their normal attack damage. So when it comes to the weaponry, I'd recommend going for any of the weapons that we mentioned in the aforementioned build, so the Black Sword, the Black Cliff Longsword, the Flute, or the Amenoa Kagauchi, but you can also consider taking elemental recharge swords, such as Festering Desire, the Sacrificial Sword, or what I would probably recommend for this build, the Favonius Sword. These all have energy recharge on them, as well as other bonuses. But when it comes to the artifacts, there are 2 options for this build, depending on who you have in your team. First of all, I'd recommend going for 4 pieces of the Noblesse Oblige set, especially if you don't have anyone who has this artifact set already in your team. For wearing 2 pieces of this artifact set, you'll gain an elemental burst, damage increase of 20%, and after using an elemental burst, it will increase all party members' attack by 20% for 12 seconds. Which means that not only will Ayato's elemental burst hit quite hard, but it also provides an attack bonus on top of the increase to our allies' normal attack whenever they are within the radius of Ayato's elemental burst. But if you do have a party member who already has the Noblesse Oblige set in your team, I'll instead recommend going for 4 pieces of the Emblem of Severed Fates. For wearing 2 pieces of this artifact set, you'll get an energy recharge bonus of 20%, and on top of that, for wearing 4 pieces, our elemental burst damage is increased by 25% of our energy recharge, up to a maximum of 75%. So it allows us to use our elemental burst more often, whilst at the same time allowing it to deal decent damage. Of course, if you are using this set, I'd strongly recommend focusing on energy recharge when it comes to your stats. But speaking of stats, when it comes to your sands, I'd recommend either energy recharge, HP, or attack. When it comes to your goblet, I recommend hydro damage, and then finally when it comes to your circlet, I recommend crit rate or crit damage. As for the substats, elemental recharge, crit damage and crit rate are all the optimal ones I would go for, followed by HP percentage and then attack percentage. And then finally for the talent priorities, I'd recommend going for your elemental burst first, followed by your elemental skill and then your normal attacks. This way you'll have a strong support build for your team that is focused around using Ayato's elemental burst to not only provide a strong source of steady hydro damage and hydro application, but also increase the damage of our allies' normal attacks, and if you're using the Noblesse Oblige set, you can also increase everyone's attack rating too. So there we have it, those are the builds that I like to use for Ayato. So let's move on to the next section where we talk about the pros and cons. Now every character in Genshin Impact comes with various pros and cons. No character is perfect. Whether you're 5-star or 4-star, there are ups and downs to every character out there. When it comes to Kamisato Ayato, his biggest pro is his damage output. The way he works, his elemental skill, coupled with how it increases the damage of his normal attacks, makes him an incredible source of hydro damage. On top of that, his elemental burst is actually quite versatile, not only dealing decent damage to opponents, applying the hydro element to them, but also increasing the normal damage of allies within its radius, allowing Ayato to provide some support to a party. And then the final pro is that he is fairly easy to build. He benefits from most of the stats in the game, bar maybe defense and defense percentage. Which brings us on to the cons, which the first one is that his elemental burst has a very high energy cost. This is alleviated slightly thanks to his passive talents, but it's still notable. And the other con is, unfortunately, if you mistime the use of his elemental skill, as in you bring him onto the field, you use the elemental skill and then realise you have to switch him off, you can incur a long cooldown on that elemental skill, which can be a negative. But regardless, his pros more than outweigh his cons, making him a strong character for any team. But speaking of teams, every character in Genshin Impact is made stronger when used in the right team composition. But when it comes to Ayato, there are a lot of options. Pyro characters definitely work well with Ayato, as you're able to create those vaporized reactions quite easily, increasing everyone's overall damage. He works well alongside cryo users as well, as you're able to freeze opponents, crowd controlling and leaving them sitting ducks. And on top of that, you may want to also consider certain characters such as Yunjin, Kujusara or Bennett, characters who can buff Ayato, especially when it comes to his normal attacks, allowing him to deal even more damage. So overall, Kamisato Ayato is a very strong DPS character. But he is not solely a DPS character, as he does have other elements to him. His elemental burst can be used as a support tool, but for me personally, I prefer to use him as a main source of damage. He is probably my main Hydra DPS character now, and for anyone who's interested in getting the character, I'd strongly recommend him. So there we have it, that is my character guide and overview to Kamisato Ayato in Genshin Impact. Now remember, there are multiple ways to play and use characters in the game, which is one of the many aspects that makes Genshin Impact so enjoyable. So at the end of the day, use the characters how you want to use them. These builds are just how I personally like to use the characters, and I hope they help you out in your adventures. So until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you a character guide to Ayato in Genshin Impact. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.